We're here for the January 10th, 2018 meeting of the Beavercreek Board of Zoning Appeals at 6 o'clock right now. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to ask for roll call.
Mr. Height?
Here.
Mr. Cruzy?
Here.
Mr. Mortar?
Here.
Mr. Raber?
Here.
Mr. Young?
Here. Okay, well, we've got our packages, guys, and I was wondering and hoping that everyone's had a chance to look at the agenda today. Are there any modifications or corrections to the agenda? And if not, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second? Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. No opposition. That motion passes. We have some minutes from our last meeting on July the 12th, 2017. It's been about 6 months, guys, but I presume you've had a chance to look at those minutes. And having looked at them, are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes? And if not, is there a motion?
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposition. Motion carries. We'll go ahead and move on to the public hearing portion of the agenda. If I could have the clerk please read the legal ad, and we'll go from there.
This is case number CU 18-1 on an application filed by Ohio Exchange Facilities Networks, LLC, 120 South Riverside Plaza, Suite 1800, Chicago, Illinois, 60660. The applicant is requesting a conditional use approval to construct a new small cell facility and related ground equipment in the city right-of-way. The property is located on the east side of Commons Boulevard, across from 2619 Commons Boulevard.
Thank you very much. If I could go ahead and have the applicant please approach the podium and provide the description of the variance request, or in this case, a conditional use permit, and also give justification for approval.
Yes. First of all, good evening, City Council. I'm with Mobility, or Ohio Exchange Facilities Networks. That's the subsidiary for Mobility in Ohio. My name's John Bear, and been working with the city, specifically Mr. Burkett, for some time concerning our applications in the city of Beavercreek. This specific request is a new pole. As Randy would be able to tell you, our preference in working with cities is to figure out a deployment that's mutually beneficial for both ourselves and the city. Our first preference is to co-locate onto existing infrastructure, whether that be city-owned or investor-owned utility, such as DP&L, AT&T, those type of infrastructure providers. In this instance, we have actually received approval previously for a co-location to an AT&T pole on Edwin Drive as an example of our efforts to site in to the jurisdiction's preference. In this instance, our RF engineers, they determine where there's a gap in coverage. In this area over by the mall, there is a gap in coverage. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for the city, that's mostly an undergrounding area, so there wasn't adequate infrastructure to attach to. So this is our one candidate in the city of Beavercreek where we are looking, making a request for a new pole. I do want to point out, Mr. Burkett had made the request, and it's part of the conditions in the packet that you see, that we reduce our height down to 40 feet. I was able, in the interim of our conversations, to make that request to our RF engineers, and I have a revised set of plans. Everything's the same with the exception of the height. We were able to get that pole height down to 36 feet, like 7 inches. By the time you attach the antenna, we're actually right at the 40 feet. So I think the request was a pole height at 40. We're actually at an overall height of 40. So we were able to bring that down a little bit further.
Great, thank you. Just for the record, there is a little card that's on the podium there, and I didn't ask you to read it, but I'm going to ask you to read it so that we can have some sort of affirmation that the testimony you just gave was in fact
Sure.
true and accurate. And also regarding that, if you could please provide your position at the company as well.
Absolutely.
So we know what capacity you're testifying in.
Sure.
Thanks.
My name is John Bear. I'm a permitting manager. My region is Dayton and the surrounding markets. And with that, I'll go ahead and read this statement.
Please, thank you.
I, John Bear, at 120 South Riverside Plaza, Chicago, Illinois, 60606, affirm that the testimony that I am about to give before the Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Beavercreek is the whole truth to the best of my knowledge.
And the testimony that you just gave is also the whole truth to the best of your knowledge, correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you. Do you have anything else to add to your presentation?
If you wanted to see this revised construction set to look at the height, as I mentioned, everything else, the meter is on the pole.
I don't know if they need to see it or not.
Okay,
I'll leave that up to Mr., sorry, I'll leave that up to Mr. Burkett to decide.
okay,
So,
thank you.
Mr. Burkett, if you'd like to give the staff report or presentation? Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. First of all, I just wanted to introduce myself. I know I haven't been, the last time I was here was about 2013 to the BZA because we had a 150-foot pole out on Shakertown Road. They made me the cell phone guy, so that's one of my titles at the city. But again, my name's Randy Burkett. I'm the city planner. I've been here 11 years. So going forward, the case you have before you is CU. A conditional use 18-1, it's the Ohio Exchange Facilities Network, LLC's conditional use approval. They're requesting approval to allow for the construction of a micro tower within our city's right-of-way. The project's located in northern Beavercreek. It's right on Commons Boulevard. Here's an aerial, Google Earth photo. There's a pole, and it's about at that location. There's an existing light pole, and what they're looking to do is put the telecommunications tower at this location here. So it's on the east side of Commons Boulevard, directly across from 2619 Commons Boulevard. Again, the property, this is kind of unique. It doesn't really have a zoning designation. I can't say it's B2, B3, or any kind of commercial zoning. It's actually in our right-of-way, and so there's no real regulations per se for setbacks or anything like that in our right-of-way. To the east, to the east over here is PUD 97-3, which is an MX PUD because it encompasses all this. It's mixed use, so there's residential, high density residential, medium density residential, and then there's some offices. So it's directly across from the Acropolis, which is a mixed. It's got professional offices and medical offices. And then to the east, as you can tell from the aerial photo, is PUD 88-21, which is the mall at Fairfield Commons. And so there's a good distance between the proposed pole, which we have in the conditions at 40 feet. But again, the applicant stated 37 feet. You can change that in the conditions if you like, but if they're already proposing to apply for a 37-foot, then they meet that 40-foot limitation. But anyway, that pole is going to be a good 500 or 600 feet back from any of the commercial buildings at the mall, and a good 400 or 500 feet back from any buildings at the Acropolis. Seen here is the proposed plan. I guess it gives a better idea of the location. There's that pole we were just looking at, and it gives an aerial photo. Again, you could see the Acropolis over here to the west, and then the mall parking lot actually over to the east. This is the actual site plan. I know it's not very, there's just not much detail you can put on it because the pole itself, they're not proposing to have any ground equipment. All the antenna, the GPS, all the electrical equipment is going to be actually mounted to the pole and rather than on the ground. So I can't show you plans for any kind of station box or landscaping or anything like that because none of that is really applicable. But there is some, and it's kind of hard to see maybe from this one. You can see there's some transformers here, electric transformers, and that's where they're going to run the electric and get the electric from those transformers. So that's just to the north by a couple hundred feet, and that's the supply power. So it is supplied by DP&L, and there's no real need for any other utilities with this application. Seen here is a cross-section of the proposed pole. Again, this plan does show it at 46 feet with a 50-foot to the top of the antenna. And as the staff report explains, we were looking to try to match the height of get closer to the height of these light poles, which are at 30 feet. So we thought a 40-foot, what they wanted at 50, and these poles are at 30. We thought a good compromise would be to have them at 40-foot maximum pole, and then they were going to add a couple extra feet for the antenna, which sticks beyond the steel pole. But again, the applicant has stated that they're only looking for a 37-foot with a 40-foot to the top of the actual antenna port rather than just the top of the tower. Staff does recommend approval of the applicant's request this evening. There are some conditions, again, that the pole height be limited to 40 feet, that the pole actually be painted to match to blend in better with the light poles that are out there, out on site now, so to paint it to match that. Also to keep any advertisements off of the pole, so that they're not putting Mobilite or any logos or anything like that on the pole. There's some small FAA regulations that they require to have to let everybody know the designation of that pole, like its location and marker number. But other than that, 2 square feet of signage that the FAA requires, no extra advertisements. Also, if it should be abandoned, 10 years from now, they find the technology is no longer, that they're not using that technology anymore, we want to make sure the pole just doesn't sit out there in perpetuity. So, they'll be obligated to come in and remove it. And that before they apply for a permit for the pole, which they'll have to get a zoning permit for, they have to show proof of liability insurance with the city, so we can keep that on file so they can indemnify the city should any accidents or anything like that occur with the pole. Also, there's a condition, if you look at our zoning code in section 158, 130, there's a series of conditions that telecommunication towers are required to have in the right-of-way. However, and I gave you a letter from our attorney stating that there's a state law that was passed earlier last year, or put in effect earlier last year, that kind of exempted these small towers from all these different sections in our code. And while there's still a lawsuit pending, we're still obligated to follow that state law. So there are certain sections in 158 that were intended for a 200-foot pole, not a 40-foot pole, that they just can't meet with these type of micro facilities. And so one of the conditions in the staff report and in the resolution say that they're exempt from following those, such as, there's a requirement, if this were a 200-foot pole, they're required that they accommodate 2 other providers, but that's just not applicable on a smaller pole. That they are required to be 300 feet away from any structure or building, even though they are with this or any property line. They couldn't meet the 300-foot setback from a property line. But in your staff report, I highlighted all the conditions or all the sections in 158, 130D, and F that they are not really. They can't really, or it's not really applicable or appropriate for them to follow. But again, staff does recommend approval. There are 2 conditions in your resolution for approval with 8 sub-conditions within that. But again, we do recommend approval, and we'll be happy to answer any questions following the public hearing. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Now that that section's done, I'd like to go ahead and open up the public to see if there's anyone wants to make any input. Not seeing anyone in the crowd, I'm going to ask the clerk whether or not we received any written input regarding this matter.
No.
And there being no public input, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and then open up the floor for board discussion. So, anyone have any questions?
I have a question. Are these towers eventually with technology going to replace the big 200-foot towers that you see along the highway or people's property that?
Yes and no.
That's the idea, I mean.
Yes and no. So obviously with densification of our network, that's what we target are the clusters of population, which
Sure.
then eases the burden of those big macro towers. There's always still going to be a need for the big macro towers, just not as many.
Right.
They're going to shift the burden. What you'll see is a lot more nationwide. You'll see a lot more of the small cell,
Right.
which, again, over time, design gets better, are going to be less and less noticeable.
Right.
Right now, just in the last 18 months, there's been tremendous improvement on the design. Mr. Burkett would tell you, we started out with a 75-foot pole. And in that time, we've been able to make modifications.
Right.
So I hope that answers your question.
Sure. I'm just kidding, but another question. Could you make the tower bend like the light poles that are all on that road?
Like a David arm?
It bends over.
Do we have any other questions? I actually have one concern, and maybe it's because I'm an idiot attorney. Mr. Burkett, you mentioned that one of the conditions for the conditional use permit is proof of liability, and that goes towards, that's required for the zoning permit to construct the tower, correct?
Right.
The amount of that insurance will be then decided at the time that the zoning permit is, the application comes in, correct? Like, you'll worry about the amount of the insurance?
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk, I'll have our attorney come up with the amount that's appropriate between them and the finance department and our engineering. It's going to be I guess, a group discussion among the heads of the departments, just to make sure that they're all on board. But, I wouldn't imagine it would be more than a couple $100,000.
Okay.
But we'll make sure it's enough that our attorney's comfortable, which means it's probably going to be quite a bit, so.
I understand. I just want to make that clear because it's not.
Yes, yeah, there was no.
It wasn't clearly stated, and usually I'm used to seeing policy limits
Okay.
of some sort there. But I'm assured from what you said that it'll be something that you'll work out with Mr. Bear and his company.
Right.
When the time comes. So I'm satisfied. Thanks. Are there any other questions?
I did have one question for Mr. Bear, if you don't mind. So originally it was a 75-foot.
Yeah, going back probably 14, 16 months,
Okay.
our original application was at 75 feet.
So given your RF engineer, they were able to get it down to 36, 37. That's not going to increase your need for further towers down the road?
Well, I can say this, and generally speaking, when you come down in height, it will require more candidates, candidly. But I can also tell you, my pipeline for the city of Beavercreek and getting approvals and deploying in surrounding areas, I can't remember what we started out with, but I know it's gone down, and currently it's 3. I mentioned earlier, we've already been approved for the one co-location on Edwin, and that's an attachment to an AT&T pole. There's this candidate, which we're discussing tonight, and then there's one more, which is over, I'm trying to think, over,
By the green, I believe.
yeah, I believe that's
It's on
right.
Indian Ripple by the green.
Right, adjacent to the car wash, and I believe there's a Starbucks right there. That would also be an attachment to an AT&T pole. So this is the only new pole.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions? There being no more questions, can I get a motion for approval of the conditional use permit presented to us as resolution for case number CU 18-1?
Motion to approve.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All right, before we vote on that, is there any discussion amongst the members of the board regarding the motion? There being none, I shall have the clerk now call the roll.
Mr. Cruzy?
Approve.
Mr. Mortar?
Yes.
Mr. Raber?
Yes.
Mr. Height?
Yes.
Mr. Hung?
Yes. Great, motion carries. There being no other requests before us, I'd like to see if we can get a motion to adjourn. Mr. Mortar makes the motion.
Second.
Mr. Height seconds. Any, here's the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries. Meeting adjourned.